Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we talk about the managing director of one of India's largest private diagnostic labs admitting that the government has been asking them to limit COVID-19 testing. We also talk about a Pakistan minister admitting that Pakistan was responsible for the Pulwama terror attack in 2019. But first, we talk about Jammu and Kashmir. The central government on Monday amended and notified the laws for the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir in a way that now anyone in the country can buy land there. This was in keeping with the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act, which bifurcated the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. This, of course, happened last year, along with the August 5th decision, which scrapped Jammu and Kashmir's special status. There are many parts of the country, like those in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, where people not belonging to the state cannot buy land. And this was the case with Jammu and Kashmir as well, until the decision taken by the government on Monday. In this segment, Deeptiman Tiwary, who reports on government agencies for the newspaper, joins us to talk about this move by the centre and the key changes that have been made.
The criteria of permanent residence, that any land which is there in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir could earlier only be sold to a permanent resident of the Union Territory, has now been removed. So it practically means that anyone can buy land in Jammu and Kashmir from across India, as it is there in several other states, barring a few which have been granted certain protection like Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. Anyone can buy land here. So that is one big change. Another change is that government has opened doors for setting up of industrial hubs and industrial zones where land will be acquired for setting up of industrial units or special zones. These development zones, which will be notified by the government, will also interestingly be insulated from existing land revenue laws in the state and Agrarian Reforms Act of the state. The government has been arguing that this has been done to bring in development in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, while the government has claimed to protect agricultural land in the state by saying that no agricultural land can be sold to a non-agriculturist, which means to a non-farmer. However, it has given inserted several other new clauses in the existing laws where even agricultural land with the consent of the government can be acquired by the government or a corporation for public purposes, or for contract farming, or for setting up healthcare or educational facilities, or for any other purpose that the government deems fit to give that land to a corporation or to a trust for charitable purposes.
So this essentially means that no piece of land in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, be it agricultural land or non-agricultural land, is protected like it was earlier and can now be acquired for various purposes as specified by the government by outsiders.
So anyone who has been harboring the dream of having outside of Jammu and Kashmir, anyone who has been harboring the dream of having a plot of land facing the Dal Lake or Nagin Lake or Vular Lake has a chance.
When it comes to the reaction of Jammu and Kashmir's mainstream political parties, Deeptiman says that they feel that this is yet another move to change the demography of the region, which has a Muslim majority population.
Sajad Loan has called it, who was once an ally of the BJP, has called it a great betrayal of the state, erstwhile state. So, yes, Jammu and Kashmir political parties are not happy. Omar Abdullah has in fact made a statement that J&K has been put up for sale and left bereft of any basic protections. The amendments add to the fear of demographic change. They want to alter the character of this place.
Apart from these recent changes to land laws, their fears of a demographic change are also based on things like changes to the domicile rules of the region.
If you remember, the government had earlier notified some domicile rules where initially it was almost free for all, and then because of a pushback largely from Jammu on this issue. The government relented and provided some protections where a certain period of residency was made mandatory for anyone to be recognized as a domicile of Jammu and Kashmir. So these fears have been expressed earlier, and they come from the August 5 decisions of 2019, when the special status of the state through Article 370 and 35A were removed, and the statehood of the region was taken away, and it was turned into a union territory to be directly administered from Delhi. So things have been building up, and this has come as another jolt to the people who thought that Jammu and Kashmir is being deprived of its special rights under which it was annexed to the Indian state.
Jammu and Kashmir's special status is what gave the state its autonomy. Article 370 and 35A, which were abrogated, are what allowed it to have its own constitution, its own penal code, and what determined the right of permanent residence in the region. But after the August 5th decision, all that was gone. And those had been the conditions, like Deeptiman mentioned, under which Jammu and Kashmir had become a part of India during the time of independence. Now, coming back to the decision regarding land laws, if we were to consider the government's argument that this is all being done for the development of the region and for new industries to be set up, the question that is being raised is, will businesses actually want to come to a place that is infected with militancy and where sentiments towards outsiders are changing? Deeptiman says that it will all depend on how much protection the government can guarantee.
Yes, Jammu and Kashmir has a volatile situation as far as security is concerned. There is a certain hostility to outsiders, especially post August 5 decisions, because people have begun to fear that their land is going to be taken away, or their culture and their way of life is going to be under threat, and their identity is going to be threatened, their unique character is going to be threatened. So, of course, there is going to be a hostility. Then there is a factor called Pakistan, which will try to fish in such troubled waters, and any person setting up any business from outside the state could face serious situations as far as militant activity is concerned. So it will all depend upon how much incentive can the Union Territory Administration give to such industrial units, and how much protection can it provide to such industrial zones and units, and to the employees who will be working there. So all of these factors will determine as to how successful these intentions are going to be.
The political climate in Jammu and Kashmir has remained tense since last year. The streets have been flooded with security forces, there have been curfews, along with internet and communication restrictions, and reportedly thousands, including political leaders like Farooq Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti, had been detained under the draconian Public Safety Act. In this light, a significant move was made by the political parties in the region 2 months back. The parties, which include the National Conference, PDP, CPI, CPM, and People's Conference, had come out with a joint statement that reiterated their commitment to strive for the restoration of Article 370 and 35A, which was abrogated more than a year ago. But despite this declaration, they are left with very few choices. Deeptiman says that as far as their endeavors to overturn these recent decisions go, they can look at street agitation and building public opinion.
Beyond that, there is nothing that anyone can do, because there is no state government anymore. So there's nothing that they can legally bring any kind of legislation or anything. There is no assembly. Everything is in the hands of Delhi, as Jammu and Kashmir is now a union territory. As and when it becomes a state, under what circumstances it becomes a state, under what laws it will become a state, what kind of powers it will enjoy, that remains to be seen, and what can it do later. So at the moment, only political statements can be made, street agitations can be done. We should also remember that most of these political parties are fighting a battle for survival at the moment, because they have been completely discredited both in the eyes of the people of rest of India and in the eyes of the people within Jammu and Kashmir, because all these political parties are basically mainstream political parties which had actually been batting for, unlike the Hurriyat, which has been demanding independence and integration with Pakistan. These political parties have been holding the Indian national flag. So for their own people, they have become like these people that you held this Indian flag all your life, and you kept trying to tell us that we are Indians, and look what India has done to us. And to the rest of the country, they have been anyway discredited as people who were, not fully integrated with India and always harbored secession sentiments or stoked such sentiments in the valley. So right now, the political parties are facing a crisis of credibility, which they are trying to build through these political statements and agitations. Because as and when the Union Territory is granted statehood, these are the political parties which will have to go to the people to seek votes and form a government. This is the time to build their credibility in the eyes of the people.
Dear listeners, before we move on to the rest of the show, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. And next, we talk about COVID-19. Now, while many countries in the West have been reporting a record number of new coronavirus infections, the cases in India have continued to decline. Both our daily new infections and the number of active cases have been going down over time. This has been happening at a time when the government reportedly hasn't reduced its testing. But when it comes to India's coronavirus numbers, many experts, both international and those in the country, have questioned it, citing that India has poor disease surveillance and that the government might be trying to suppress the actual numbers. Though now, confirming some of these suspicions, the managing director of one of India's top private diagnostic labs called Thyrocare Technologies has told the Indian Express that the government authorities in some districts have been trying to control the process of testing for COVID-19 in order to show a better scorecard. Prabha Raghavan, who reports on health and pharma for the newspaper and who broke the story, joins us now to talk about it. She starts by telling us about Thyrocare Technologies.
Thyrocare Technologies is a diagnostic chain that is headquartered out of Mumbai. It has over 1,000 outlets and collection centers across India, as well as other parts of the world, I think mostly neighboring countries. It was founded by an Indian scientist named Swami Velumani. And he's the one who I had spoken to for this story that had come out in the paper that we're discussing. Basically, what he had told me was that even today, despite testing for COVID being opened up by the government, despite there being easier access to testing, the fact that you can go and get an RT-PCR test without a prescription now, despite all of that, on some level, there is still government control being exercised on how much and how frequently private centers can test for COVID.
Velumani told Prabha that this is not happening at the higher level, like the center where the government is actually pushing for more testing. This, he said, is happening at the level of states and districts, where they're trying to keep a better score than their neighboring states.
So, given that pressure that you have to ensure that your state doesn't really come up with as many cases, that your districts in your states don't come up with as many cases, what some of these private centers have been facing is a sort of control at the district level, where authorities are telling them, don't pick up samples for these many days, don't pick up samples past a certain limit.
After her conversation with Velumani, Prabha also reached out to other diagnostic companies to see if they were facing these problems. And at first, it did seem like this may have been a one-off issue. But then she spoke to more companies.
Until I actually came across, a few companies that said, no, this issue was happening, but it was happening maybe a few months ago. And now we think things are better. We don't really want to get in trouble. And so a lot of these other diagnostic companies that I was speaking to were quite wary of actually talking to me on record about this because they clearly wanted to toe the line where this issue was concerned. Another diagnostic chain that I spoke to actually told me that yes, this is still happening even today.
When she had spoken to Velumani, he had told her that around 2,000 of the company's samples were not being picked up every day across at least 100 districts in the country.
And that's something that's kind of similar to what I was hearing from this other diagnostic chain, which was saying, yeah, we're not really sure about how many districts there are, but there are certain districts in states like Maharashtra or Gujarat where, we've been facing difficulty in testing at our fullest capacity. We are told on some level to not to test beyond a certain limit, not to collect beyond a certain limit of samples every day. And we're also on some level told not to send the reports that we get directly to ICMR, which is the body that is the central body that is overseeing the country's testing strategy in collaboration with the health ministry. And so some of these private centers are saying that even at that level of, whether or not we are allowed to tell the center that someone we've tested has tested positive, that we don't really necessarily have the freedom to do that because we have to get it vetted by those district authorities first. So if they tell us not to send a certain number of reports or a certain set of reports until they say yes, then we shouldn't do it because if we go against their wishes, there will be consequences.
Prabha says that the fact that something like this was happening didn't really come as a surprise to her. What did come as a surprise, though, was the fact that someone like Velumani, who represents such a large diagnostic chain, actually came out on the record and said it.
It must have taken a lot of courage for a company to come out and admit that, yes, we're verbally being told. Because, when these instructions are given verbally, there is no real proof, right? So for a company to actually come out and say, yes, we have been instructed not to pick up any samples until Diwali. And, we are still being controlled across maybe 100 districts in this country. Our ability to test is being controlled. I think that was the more surprising thing for me. And that's mostly because I have been reporting on this pandemic for a while. But apart from that, just the idea that, yes, maybe some districts might actually be engaging in practices like this where they're trying to put a cap on how much the centers in that area are testing. It doesn't sound too far-fetched a scenario, because we also have to understand that on a political level also, I think the optics are so important, right? To show that we as a state are managing this pandemic better than X number of states or the other states. And I think that's why it's not so far-fetched an idea. But yeah, I mean, the fact that someone came out and said it so blatantly, that was a surprise for me.
Apart from being asked to limit the testing that they did, an executive that Prabha spoke to off the record told her that private labs have also been facing harassment.
And this harassment has taken place in various ways. At least the claims that they're coming out with are that if they aren't complying with these verbal instructions of some of these district authorities, there are efforts that are made to find loopholes that can be used to say that the private lab is either reporting false positives or is not complying with regulations. And in certain cases, some labs have been shut down. in comparison, what this private firm's executive claims is that the government facilities that are conducting testing haven't really been subjected to that level of scrutiny.
Prabha does, however, point out that this bit hasn't been verified by her personally, but it is something worth looking into.
On the other hand, I mean, when I did reach out to ICMR, the response that we did get was that these are private labs and there's no control of ICMR over what the states are allowed to do in terms of whether or not they want to allow a private center to test or how they want to enforce certain regulations. So that's also a thing to keep in mind when we're discussing an issue like this.
At a time when there are reports of cases declining in India and speculations that India's COVID-19 peak might be over, private labs saying that they are being asked to limit testing holds significance. Also considering that we know that the coming few months will be particularly challenging.
We're at a stage in this pandemic where we're headed for a phase in the winter where, we know that colder temperatures are better for the virus to spread. We're headed for a time where respiratory infections and diseases actually see a spike during this time. And given this fact, we as a country need to know how many cases are being detected and which regions so that we can actually contain them in time, more specifically to protect those who are more vulnerable to severe effects from getting COVID. And this would be people older than a certain age group and those with comorbidities. So, I mean, that's the main point of testing, right? To ensure that we detect enough cases in time, maybe contain enough cases in time, and ensure that we can manage these cases in situations where we need to have enough infrastructure, enough healthcare infrastructure ready to tackle those cases. Now, the significance of this statement or these claims being made by companies like these is that you're sort of keeping not just the public, but even the central government in the dark about what the on-ground reality is, where India's ability to tackle this pandemic is concerned. So I think that's the significance of the information that's coming out at the current stage.
And in the end, we talk about Pakistan. Yesterday, a senior Pakistan minister admitted that Pakistan was responsible for the deadly 2019 Pulwama terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir, in which 40 CRPF personnel were killed. The minister in question was Fawad Chaudhry, the Minister of Science and Technology, and it was during the National Assembly debate that he said, quote, "We hit India in their home. Our success in Pulwama is a success of this nation under the leadership of Imran Khan. You and us are all part of that success."
हमने हिंदुस्तान को घुस के मारा है जनाब स्पीकर वहां पे, और पुलवामा में जो कामयाबी है, पुलवामा में जो हमारी कामयाबी है, वो इमरान खान की क़यादत में इस कौम की कामयाबी है. उसके हिस्सेदार आप भी सब हैं, उसके हिस्सेदार हम भी सब हैं.
Fawad Chaudhry is a close aide of Prime Minister Imran Khan. And he made these remarks a day after a leader of an opposition party had said something in the parliament. Basically, the opposition leader Sardar Ayaz Sadiq had targeted Army Chief General Bajwa and talked about the time when Indian Air Force Wing Commander Abhinandan Vardhaman had landed across the border in an aerial dogfight after the Balakot airstrikes by New Delhi. Sardar Ayaz Sadiq said that the Army Chief General Bajwa was perspiring and his legs were shaking when Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said that India would have attacked that night at 10 p.m. if Pakistan did not release Abhinandan.
मुझे याद है शाह महमूद कुरैशी साहब उस मीटिंग में थे जिसमें प्राइम मिनिस्टर साहब ने आने से इनकार कर दिया और चीफ ऑफ आर्मी स्टाफ तशरीफ लाए. पैर कांप रहे थे, पसीने माथे पे थे और हमसे शाह महमूद साहब ने कहा, फॉरेन मिनिस्टर साहब ने कि खुदा का वास्ता है अब इसको वापस जाने दें, क्योंकि 9 बजे रात को हिंदुस्तान पाकिस्तान पे अटैक कर रहा है.
Right now in Pakistan, both Imran Khan and Army Chief General Bajwa are facing unprecedented opposition from major political parties that have formed an alliance called the Pakistan Democratic Movement and who want to overthrow Khan from his post. Multiple rallies have taken place with tens and thousands of protesters. We had discussed this in detail in an episode earlier, the link to which is in today's episode description. You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and as always was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explain section. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.